to you all. It's Justin Dawson. It's the All Things TechIE podcast, and I hope you are all keeping well, keeping safe during this lockdown, and hopefully we're giving you loads of entertainment to listen to from the All Things TechIE podcast. This is your first time listening to us. Welcome along. We would love if you get involved by sending comments and also subscribing to our program. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast store, and it really means a lot to us. And you can also follow us on Twitter, AV Tech Junkies, as well. Now, under this spotlight, this episode, in episode 24, is the founder of avnation.tv. It is Tim Albright. Episode 24 of the All Things TechIE podcast.
The All Things TechIE podcast is a product of the Extreme Media Network. For advertising and sponsorship opportunities, please visit www.extrememedia.ie. That's XTREME media.ie.
I won't guess how many years you've been involved in audiovisual. Do you want to admit that?
Sure. Properly 14 years, just kind of on the edges for about 30.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to dive right back to that stage and go, where did it all begin? Like, what did you study in university, or did you go to university even?
So when I say 30 years, so I started as a lighting assistant for my church's production team. So that's what got me in it. That got me involved in all sorts of stuff, theater, areas that we can discuss how much is AV, but it's all, audio, video, and lighting. In university, I studied radio broadcasting and audio production. And so mixing the audio and getting stuff produced that way.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
then taught it.
Me, Tim, are you like me? Like, I did radio broadcasting as well in college.
Yep.
Were you like me that wanted to be the next show jock and then just realized, hey, there's no money in radio, and then end up in AV and go, hey, there's no money in AV either?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't that smart. I actually went into radio and then realized it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll have to tap into this radio end of things. So what end of radio were you involved in?
So I started out at a news talks radio station in St. Louis. Worked for CBS for a lot of years, so learned that end of it. Learned the radio, the broadcast journalism part, and was involved in that and TV here locally. 9/11 happened, and I was like, I'm too young, and the life is too short. So I went over to the music side. And got involved in a morning show that was eventually I got involved with a syndicated one here in the States, regionally syndicated, and was their audio production person, and was on the air for a number of years. And then kids happened, came along, and morning radio does not mix well with having kids for some people.
I can admit that. Yeah, no, it doesn't.
It didn't for me. So I looked around for a job, and the university that I graduated from had an opening, and amongst the duties was annually you had to upgrade a couple rooms and this, that, and the other, and I took that and kind of ran with it. And got my CTS and got involved with programming and designing and just kind of took the ball and ran with it. And that part became more and more of what my duties were. It became more of an AV job.
Yeah, so like you, at that stage, you realize that, hey, I'm enjoying more the tech end of doing this than I actually am enjoying doing the radio ends of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like it sounds very similar, because like that's recession hit in Ireland, and I came out of a master's degree, and I was working in a news talk radio station doing sound engineering, and then no jobs were available even when it went to a national broadcaster. and then went down the IT route, and then IT became AV,
Yep.
doing stuff for PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC here in Ireland, and then realized like even that was long hours as well. So on that note, like you mentioned as well there along the way, CTS.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I always say, people always ask, like, where do you begin? Do you actually go off and do your CTS? Is that the most important qualification to get an audiovisual, do you think?
In today's audiovisual, if it's not the first, it's the second. And I'll hedge my bets a little bit here, because the first two you should get is some sort of IT certification as well as the CTS. And we just finished up a 3-day conference, and one of the fascinating things is during these keynotes, the audience has been chatting, right? And you can watch those. And one of the things that kept coming up time and again is a discussion is whether or not AV is IT, or are we in the IT industry?
Absolutely.
Yeah, as I say, my personal opinion is yes, right? But not for anything else. This is not a philosophical discussion for me. It's a monetary one. Who writes the checks? Okay. And when you look at the vast majority of the dealers across the world, the people who finance AV currently is the IT department. So we are in some way, shape, or form in the IT industry. So we need to understand that. We need to understand the topology. We need to understand the architecture. We need to understand where they're coming from. Do you have to have a Cisco high-level certification? No. But you need to have some sort of CCNA. You need to have some sort of basic understanding of what their issues are, right? What keeps them up at night, and how can we as AV folks solve them? And to do that, you have to have some sort of certification under your belt for IT. So I'd say number one and number two is some sort of IT certification, and then the first is the next one is CTS.
Yeah, no, and do you know what? I've had this conversation as well with Mark Coxon, and he would say something similar, that you would need some IT qualifications. But I think at times it's vice versa. You could be working in an IT department doing audiovisual, but the IT guys need to understand why you want certain ports open if you're doing AV over IP.
Yes.
You know, yeah. So I think it works both ways if you're stuck in an environment like that. People say as well, Tim, that you mentioned church production as well. Is that a great end of things to just get some background scope on sound and visuals?
Say that part again, because I'm
so like if you're a young 15 or 16-year-old, it's not a good start. It's to get work experience in
I think so. I mean, it's a great. Here's the thing. It's a great entry level that doesn't require a whole lot, right? The old joke of, I need 20 years experience to get this job, but I can't get this job without experience, right? Type thing. You need experience, but you don't have any. But to get that roundabout circle, doing stuff in school and doing stuff in church, the barrier to entry is very, very low. Quite frankly, they're both looking for warm bodies that they can teach, right, and they can mold, as opposed to your local integrator or even you looking for somebody for university. A lot of times you want somebody that has some basic skills. There, they just need somebody to teach stuff, right, and you can get a good idea of whether or not this is for you, right. One of the most fascinating things to me, and the thing that at mid 40s, 45, 46 years old still jazzes me up, is sitting down and sitting back and appreciating an incredible amount of work, whether that is taking a blank room from design all the way through implementation, or it's a stage, right, that 6 hours earlier was completely blank, and now you've got line arrays and you've got lights and stuff like that. The appreciation of the work and the design and the experience that you're getting ready to create for people still excites me, right? 30 years later. So I think that if that's something, that's an avenue and that's a safe place, both schools and churches, for you to get your feet wet and decide whether or not it's for you. It may not be, and that's okay. And then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned now nearly 30 years of background between radio and audiovisual. What's been the most interesting company that you've worked with?
Oh,
I'm putting you on the spot now. What that question?
It would be a cop-out to say my own, wouldn't it? So I'll give you two, and for two different reasons. Number one, I worked for a company called Bonneville Broadcasting.
Okay.
Bonneville International is the for-profit arm of the Mormon Church. Okay. So I worked for the Mormon Church in essence, and it was fascinating, some of the things, and having come from CBS, and CBS is a straight up secular, 100% bottom line, give me all the money you can type, capitalist, up one side and down the other, nothing wrong with that. At Bonneville, we had certain things that we wouldn't do commercials for, we wouldn't take money for, right? Here in St. Louis, we have a number of riverboat casinos. Mm-hmm. You would never, at the time, hear any sort of commercials for the casinos themselves, right? You would not hear the commercial of come out and gamble.
Yes.
They would get around that by promoting concerts or something else like that, but never explicitly come out and gamble, right? No beer advertising. No, here in St. Louis, we're the center of Anheuser-Busch, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. But you would not hear commercials for AB or any other alcohol. So that was fascinating, and I got to work with them the year of the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. Right. So talking with colleagues and coworkers at the time, hearing those stories and seeing how that happened. Mm-hmm. The entirely extreme opposite was when I worked for my college, right? It was, it's a nonprofit, obviously. It's a local university, locally funded, a small community college that did a lot of really great things and a lot of cool things, but they were not concerned with the bottom line. They were concerned with making the community better, right? Okay. And that gave us some flexibility and some freedom that you wouldn't normally have in a for-profit company.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I'm going to throw in a little span in the works of go. We've all had moments in audiovisual or tech where things go wrong. What is your fondest moment of something that really went wrong for you, whether it be a live event, whether it be an install that you just went, oh crap, and how did you solve it?
Oh Lord.
That sounds like an interview question right there.
Well, it does. The question is, which one do you tell, right? So do you tell on yourself, or do you tell on the wonderful faculty and staff that you've had to deal with over the years and some of their idiocies? Let me think about that for a second, because what's the worst? So we did a broadcast every year of our commencement. Actually, it's coming up for that college in about 3 weeks here. And not only did we broadcast it, we had a local cable channel here in our little town. That was the colleges. That was actually part of my responsibilities, with making sure there was content on this cable channel. In addition to that, we did the commencement live. We also fed it over to a overflow room. So in case the theater where we held the commencement reached capacity, folks could go over to this overflow room and they could still watch. And for whatever reason, somebody, we ran fiber to everywhere on campus. And about 10 minutes before we were set to start commencement, for whatever reason, somebody decided that the rack of fiber equipment that I had in a bowels of this building didn't require power anymore, and so the entire rack got shut off. About 10. Oh yeah, it was fantastic. And suddenly we're getting calls from the overflow room, and we're getting calls from people watching the TV on at home. And it took us about it took us right up until commencement, and I think we were actually a minute or two late to figure out, number one, what had happened. So why our signal wasn't getting out of our room, and then to figure out, okay, what's going on. And when you're staring, looking at a rack, you're not, and your your adrenaline's going, and you're trying to troubleshoot here.
We've all been there. Yeah.
The lack of power is the last thing on your list, right? Because of course it has power. Who in their right mind would kill power to this? And sure enough, that's exactly what it was. And so once we flipped the switch, the blades revved up again, and
did
suddenly,
you ever find out the reason of why this?
We never found out who.
Oh,
right? It was a switch, right? It wasn't like the building lost power. It wasn't like the rack. Something happened where the physical switch had gotten turned off. So
that sounds very deliberate.
Deliberate or not, I don't know, but I just know it happened, and that was the fix. So
yeah. So how did you go from doing these type of roles in universities to your own work and doing AV Nation? Where did AV Nation start off from? How did this concept come to life?
I made a deal with the devil and I lost. So you and I both have broadcast background, and the one thing about broadcasting is it gets in your blood, right? And for me, unfortunately, it never got out. I never got healed of the need to broadcast and to create content. And so I had gotten hooked on Leo Laporte and This Week in Tech.
I love Leo Laporte, yes.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
And so Leo was one of the early podcasters, right? And this was 05, 06. I was still teaching audio production, actually incorporated podcasting into my classes, because I genuinely thought, and I still genuinely think, that this is the next iteration of broadcasting, right? That it gives us certain freedoms. The barrier to entry is very low. So after about 5 years of that, I'm like, I've never made my own, right, for us. And so I started looking around. I had gotten involved in the AV industry, and I started looking around for a twit version of AV, right? So I wanted This Week in Tech for AV, and it didn't exist. Several publications, Infocom at the time had made podcasts. Sound and Communications had. A number of folks had made podcasts for AV, but nothing that took a look at a weekly basis at the news and why it mattered. And so me being, I guess, pretty simplistic guy, I'm like, okay, well, there's not one, so let's make one. And I had gotten involved with Twitter and social media a little bit up to that point. I am naturally an introvert, and so I don't, reaching out, it takes a lot of energy. So I just basically just kind of said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Does anybody want to do it with me? And George Tucker, who has now become an integral part of AV Nation, and a young woman by the name of Linda Sedfrembus, who was a writer at the time. She has since gone on to work for Boston Globe and other places. Both said that they would. And then I also, I kind of forced a buddy of mine here locally who worked for a local integrator to do it. And so we set up the equipment and press record, and that was the end of July in 2011, and we've produced AV Week every Friday since. Wow. So we're at 450 some odd episodes. Mm-hmm. And the other things that kind of came out of that, right? The other monthlies and the further down the trail. You
mentioned Leo Laporte there. Big broadcaster, goes on cruise ships. He's on FM radio across America. Have you ever thought, is there room for this type of thing on FM radio across America?
Certainly. Yeah. I played with the idea of here locally, because I still have contacts locally in radio. I've thought about pitching a version of this to Sirius XM. It's a big lift. It really is. And we are actually in the process of moving offices, expanding, growing. And so once we get certain things in place, I think from a technical standpoint, we'll be in a better position than we would have been 6 months ago to do that. And so at
Like
that point,
this
I'll
is
have a better.
now considered your full-time role doing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's super. That is absolutely super. That, like, at the moment, like, this podcast is just a hobby for me, but you've hit the ground running back in 2011. You've done a lot more than me, Tim.
Don't misunderstand. This was not full time until 3 or 4 years ago,
Right.
right? So there was a long time of this was volunteer for everybody.
Yeah, and so when did you before you made the leap, where were you based?
So when I started, I was still working at the college, and then I did I worked for 2 other places in the interim between the college and doing this full time. I worked for an integrator here locally, doing Crestron programming, design, and then and as a sales engineer, and then I ran an independent programming house out of St. Louis.
Right.
And I did that for about 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. And we got bought by a local integrator. And the guy who bought us was a buddy of mine, still is a buddy of mine. He's one of my, I would call him one of my business advisors, one of my business mentors. And we're sitting down and he's explaining what he wants me to do and, where he sees me. And I simply said, you know what? I said, this seems like a really great time to see if I can't make a living at this, right? If I can't make a swing at this. And that was in the fall of 2015.
No. Okay.
And so about 4 years ago. And, it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't great. And we've made a lot of mistakes and continue to make mistakes, but as long as we learn from them, I think we'll still be going strong a number of years from now.
Like, you have a big competitor market. There's AB Magazine. They try and do their podcast. You have the AB Awards done by AB Magazine. I know yourself and Chris Nito have been over for the AB Awards as well, but it was a gigantic leap, and at times I'd say to myself, I'd love to do a leap and just go out on my own. And how did the family support you on that type of end of things when you turn around to your wife and say, I'm right in saying 2 kids at the moment that you have, Tim. When do you make that decision to your wife and go, by the way, I have this crazy idea, honey, I want to go out on my own, I want to do some podcasting, I want to do some media on things I love?
My wife has thankfully always been very supportive. And it's funny that you use the word crazy idea. That is generally how our conversations start. Is I have a crazy idea. And there have been very few times that she has said, that sounds too crazy, right? Let's not do that. And they've not all turned out, certainly not. But I'm of the opinion that there are a handful of things in this world that you can control, and the biggest one is you, right? The biggest one is you and what you do with life and how you treat people. And if I'm working hard and I'm trying to move forward and trying to push forward, God, divinity, the universe, whatever you want to call it, will honor that. And I'm trying to do something better, right? I'm trying to make the world better. I'm trying to connect with people and make their lives better. It's silly. Yeah, it's that and the other, but it's still trying to make the world a better place in my little corner of it. So, yeah, she has been really, really supportive all the way, and it was a conversation we were already starting to have. Because my work schedule was my real work, my full-time work schedule was getting a bit much, and then AB Nation was suffering because of it. And the question at that point okay, we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. Is this something, or should we just kind of put it on the shelf and let it go away? And we both felt that, let's see what happens. What's the worst thing that's going to happen is, we go broke and we go back to getting a job. And again, that was 4 years ago.
Yeah, and well, the great thing is you have a team behind you that's also supporting you on this end of things as well. Now, I did mention previous there that you do all the trade shows. You do ISE, you do
A lot. We don't do all. We don't do all of them.
You don't do all of them.
Yes.
But the two major ones in audiovisual
Yeah.
is ISE and Infocom. So I'm going to throw a quick fire question of which one's better and why.
Oh, that's an unfair question. My favorite one, and I'll explain why. My favorite one to attend is ISE.
Okay.
And the reason is because I'm a big dumb American from the middle of the country, who never went anywhere in his life, right? I mean, I think that we went to the Bahamas on a cruise on our honeymoon, and that was the most outside the country I had been. So when we went to ISE the first time, I was flabbergasted. I was beside myself, and I have enjoyed connecting with you, connecting with others around the world. And I do that through ISE, right? So it's my favorite to attend for a number of reasons. From a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint, it expands my horizons, and it introduces me to new people, to new experiences, to new food, which there's nothing wrong with that. I love different foods and good food. So that's been good. From a which one do I need to do I like to cover more? It is Infocom here in the States, because this is the vast majority of our audience, right? Not to be silly, but the biggest portion of our audience does come from North America. We are trying to change that and expand that, but right now, right here on this Friday morning, it's most of our folks are from North America, so that's the one I like to, because that's our biggest audience.
Yeah. Now, when was the first year that you actually went to ISE?
2015.
Wow, so it's not that far, not that long ago. Now, when you say Infocom, is it better in Vegas or Orlando?
Oh, Vegas. Vegas without question. And I'm a big guy, dude. I don't like humidity, so I'll take the heat over humidity all day.
Yeah, no, I still have to get over to an Infocom because everyone keeps up. And I've just even figured out, I think we've had this conversation off mic before, that it's cheaper for me probably to go to Vegas and stay in a hotel a hotel that's the size of my house, with regards to a room as big as my house, and than going to ISE in Amsterdam or in Spain. And with COVID-19, who knows what's going to happen there next year?
That is the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
So we were supposed to, AV Nation was supposed to do a little junket over to Barcelona, because I've been to Barcelona once in my life. I took a cab to a hotel. I went to the hotel to the airport. That was, so I'm not familiar with the town, right? So we were going to do kind of a fact-finding trip this summer and make appointments with like local video crews and kind of get the lay of the land. That's not happening. Quite frankly, it's just not going to happen because of COVID. And the question now is, number one, does ISE happen in 2021? If I had to lay money on one, I would say yes, it's going to happen. Just sitting right here, right now, not knowing anything, as long as everything hits the trajectory that it looks like it's going to. But then the question is, do we go in blind, right? And that's not a pleasant thing to think about.
When do you make the decision of like going over on the test run? Are you going to go in the new year, 2021?
We're going. So I made the commitment to Mr. Blackman, Mike Blackman, the show director, that we would do at least 1 year of Barcelona. Our early projections was that it would cost us about 20 to 30% more at the time than Amsterdam. And we'll figure out how to make that happen in this, that, and the other. But yeah, the question is, when do we go over, or do we go over? And if we don't, how do we make some of those decisions? Now, I will tell you that very smartly, ISE has offices in Barcelona now, and they've had it for quite some time. So we should be able to connect with them, right, and pick their brain and tell them, see, this is what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for a camera crew. I'm looking for a construction crew. I'm looking for this, that, and the other. Who can you point me to, right? I'm looking for a hotel that's close to the convention center. I'm looking for a place to have a party. That's why the ISE team has offices there. That's why the team goes down there. I know for a fact at least once a quarter, sometimes more than that, to have meetings so they can get more familiar with the area, so they can help their vendors, but also folks like me and AV Magazine and SCN and everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to throw a couple more quick fire questions to you.
Yep.
You have your CTS. Have you ever thought of doing CTS D or I?
I did. I failed the D.
All right.
And never went back.
Never went back. So the likes of Chuck Espinoza has not been like hammering at you to try and do a D or no? No. Okay.
No, I want to. And honestly, there's two folks that Mark Coxon is one of the reasons, because Mark went after his D and his I with ferocity, and watching him has made me want to. I don't have a reason, right? There's not a work reason necessarily, but I think it would be neat to have, and I think it would teach me a lot in the prep for it.
Mm-hmm. You know, like I've looked at the I, and I had the exam date set. I had a date set back in March, and that's been all postponed because of COVID. And then I said to Chuck, oh wow, Avixa's opened up all their courses. You know, are you going to do an CTSI prep? And he said, no, we're just doing some videos or whatever. And I said, oh well, I was going to do my exam. He all of a sudden sends me a load of questions, rapid fire by WhatsApp. And I was like, right, I'm not ready for this exam. Like the acronyms he threw at me, I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about anymore, you know. And talking about of acronyms, like, do you find at times with acronyms with AV in the States and in Europe, like you might call something totally different? Do you find that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I think it was Twitter a couple of weeks ago. Kevin McLaughlin was saying that exact same thing, and not just acronyms, but words in general, right? And it's funny, it's just terminology. I mean, we both the old joke about we are two countries separated by a common language, right? Because we both technically speak English, but good God, we speak different versions of it, and that's honestly the same for us here in the States. Depends on what region you're in, and sometimes it depends on which side of the river you're on. But yeah, we certainly have our own acronyms, our own terminology, our own phrases for things, and that is something that Avixa will have to figure out. And they've done a pretty decent job. Their translators and their the folks that write their curriculum and write their testings, they use local native speakers that also speak English to get that, to get those translations done. And, some of the challenges though are the acronyms and are the terminologies that sometimes are manufacturer specific, right? Or it is industry specific. Now I'll pick on DSP for a second, right? Digital signal processor. Well, does that translate to Arabic? Does that translate to French? Does that translate to Russian? I don't know the answer to that because I don't speak any of those languages. Or do we just refer to it as DSP all over the world, and the folks in Russia just know that means this in Russian, right?
Absolutely. Or the one that always trips me up is DOOH. I was like, what's dough? We talked about the best conferences to go to. So if you were to specialize, if you were to start all over again and say, I'm going to specialize in a certain area of audiovisual, what would it be?
Honestly, today, security.
Yeah.
You're asking me that, it's security.
Yeah. If you were to go back and say, okay, AV Nation is finished, would you go into security, or what end of AV would you love to tap into?
So we did not do a good job early on tapping into the residential side. And we're still feeling the effects of that, still trying. I mean, good Lord, one of our board members and owners was on the CDA board, for crying out loud, and we still don't do a good job of that. So that's one aspect that I wish that we would do a better job of.
If you were to have a present of a tech toy for Father's Day or your birthday, unlimited budget, and your son or daughter or your wife was going to go out and buy a tech toy, what would you want?
Tesla.
Oh,
yep.
Good choice. Yeah,
a Tesla X Series. Yeah, I want the gull-wing doors. Yep.
Yeah, okay, that's a good answer there. Crestron or Extron, or neither, or why?
Depends on what we're talking about. Quite frankly, I've used both. I've used both for different reasons. It really does depend on what you're talking about. Unfortunately, I cover the AV over IP debate. I am no longer in it, though, and that's unfortunate. So I rely on folks like you, right, and folks like Kevin, and folks here in the States to give me feedback on the reasonings for that one specifically. I see it as a replacement for big ginormous matrices. I totally get that. And if you need to get the video outside the room, but as a former tech manager, I look at that and I look at our 300, our 200 little classrooms that I serviced. I would never put AV over IP in those classrooms.
And you know what?
Right?
Yeah, no, like, let's even bring that back to our radio days here, Tim. Like, I see jobs advertised, and it's like, okay, so you know how to use a digital mixing desk. It's like, no, I know how to use a mixing desk. Why do I need to know how to use a digital mixing desk? I know how to tune a mixing desk. Now, I might not be the Chuck Espinoza of tuning a mixing desk, but I know how to tune a mixing desk. So you just added an extra load of computeristic screens onto this. That's just going to confuse me more. But you know what? If you bring it back to basics, analog, I can tune a mixing desk. So again, is it needed? Is it required? Is these extra features of a digital mixing desk for live event needed versus give me an old-fashioned analog mixing desk?
Well, and I think sometimes people overcomplicate that, right? You're right. Why are you specifying digital? Because unless there's a gotcha, right? And you and I can parse through various digital consoles, and I have my favorites, and I'm sure you do too, for various reasons. But I know how to mix, right? Let's start there. I know how to mix. Yes, your interface might be slightly different. The Yamaha is different than the Allen & Heath, which is different than the Soundcraft, right? Certainly. But as long as I can figure out where my subs are and where my EQ is, and if you've got onboard processing, where that is, I can figure it out from there. So throwing in the word digital, unless you're specifying that you have to know how to run a D12 or a D11 or a D9, SD9 or SD11, then don't bother putting in the digital part. But go back for a second to the Crestron Extron. I started my first control system was Extron. I learned on Global Viewer, right? It's what got me excited about control. I then went on and got my Crestron certification, and learned how to program Crestron. They are different animals, and they are used in different areas. They both, over the last 15 years, have expanded their business models to not only get in each other's spaces, but get into folks' space that they weren't in 15 years ago. And I joke with both companies because I have friends that work at both companies. Y'all are playing in other people's playground, and you can't look at me and going, I'm not being fair, because you have suddenly become a DSP manufacturer and speakers and this and that. When I started using you, you were just a control company, right? Yeah, exactly. Or you were just a fantastic switch company. Yeah. And now you are playing in other people's playground where I also have friends that work there as well. And so it's difficult as somebody who is trying to make the best decision when you have these companies that, and for growth purposes, and I understand from a business standpoint why they do it, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? And they've got the technical know-how. One thing I go back to with Crestron is they have an electrical engineer who makes their own power supplies. Okay, that's fascinating to me, right? The fact that they find value in the investment in making sure that their power supplies are, number one, the best, but also it's theirs, right? They're sourcing them. It is fascinating to me, as opposed to other companies, and I'm not going to pick on any one of the vast majority of 1,000 vendors that would have been at Infocom. But there are people that go out and they buy speakers from a manufacturer, slap their name on it, and suddenly they're a speaker company, right? Well, that's not really true either, right? So yeah, I honestly think it's a cop-out answer, but it's an honest answer where it depends on what you're trying to do and you know the solution you're trying to solve, or the problem you're trying to solve, on who to use.
Tim, that is the best answer that I've had coming from asking that question to people. What are you trying to achieve? What solution? Because you in a different type of version of what you've just answered. My favorite, and I'll probably cut this out afterwards, is you go to ISE and you're walking around the trade stalls. It's like, oh, you work in higher education. Let me show you this smart board. It works with Microsoft for Teams. Gone. I've immediately switched off. I don't use Microsoft for Teams, but it works for Microsoft for Teams. Gone. I'm just like, yeah, next. You know, come ISE, the next ISE, I say everyone's going to be using the words "it works with Zoom."
Oh yeah.
That's going to be the difference. It's not going to be Microsoft Teams. No one uses Microsoft Teams. No university that I know in Ireland properly uses Microsoft Teams. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your son Tim, are you going and daughter? Are they interested in audiovisual, or would you even subject them to audiovisual?
I'd subject it to him. Yeah, I mean that's okay. My son is interested in audio editing. He sits in our studio here and has started to play around. He's 11, right? So I'm not expecting him to be, a grand producer next month or next year. Mm-hmm. But he's interested in creating and putting things together. My daughter is a typical 14-year-old girl who lives on TikTok and dances around and does her theater thing. So that's, right now she has no interest in AV.
She only comes to daddy when something's not working now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned to you in our AV pub crawls virtually, that my son Kieran comes in and just finds the headphones in my room and finds that I have a spinny chair and what's this thing in front of me that he can tap off and pull down and pull the microphone arm off the shelf if need be. So if you have any advice for anyone that's entering the world of audiovisual, what tips would you give?
Number one, treat it like a buffet right now. Because it goes back to what you and I talked about churches and schools. Treat it like a buffet. Try a little bit of everything, because there's aspects of this industry that some of us don't realize is part of AV. That is, and it's fascinating. It's fantastic, but we don't get exposed to it. So try to get exposed to everything. I'll pick on Meg Smith for a second. Meg did a class for us. She works for a rather large technology company right now, but she came by AV and through Cirque du Soleil. Mm-hmm. And that's a company that, brother, had I been involved in AV before wife and kids, I'd have jumped at the chance to work there. Right. I fascinating.
Cirque du Soleil yet, but every time I hear it mentioned.
You make it to Vegas, I will take you to a show. Seriously.
Yeah.
Because it is an experience you have to see. You really do, especially from AV, right? Yeah. Especially from an AV perspective, you've got to see what these people do. But yes, I would say get exposed to everything. I mean, you may not think you like lighting, and get in front of a hog and go, oh my gosh, this is the best thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
Or you might get off on control, or security or IT, So yeah, I would say just get exposed to as many things as possible before going down a path. And the other thing about that is don't be afraid to go down a different path, even though you may have gone down a path, certain direction for a certain part of your life. And there's nothing wrong with trying something new.
Yeah. On that note, Tim, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for doing this. You have to get ready for an AV Nation later on.
In about 3 hours, 4 hours. Yeah.
And have you got everything prepared?
No.
No.
There were two pieces of news that dropped yesterday. So now I've got to rewrite some of my intros. Blue Jeans got bought by Verizon for some asinine reason.
Yeah.
And here in the States, our small business loan pile of money is suddenly gone. And we've got to figure out what that means for the integrators that did not get on that list. So
I think that buyover is going to be very interesting. What Verizon got in store there. No one seen that one coming.
So do you remember 20 years ago when AOL bought Time Warner?
Right. Yeah.
This makes about as much sense to me now as that one did then. Mm-hmm. So I don't see that one. But I'm also not, worth a couple $1 billion either. So that may be a reason for that.
Yeah. Is Zoom getting the correct bashing that it deserves at the moment?
No. Heck no. It's the pinata of the day. People are frustrated. People are at home. Yes, there are security issues, but there are security issues with everything. I think Lifesize, quite frankly, and I don't know anybody at Lifesize, and this is not me being mean. Zoom is not a sponsor of mine either, so don't misunderstand what I'm going to say. I think Lifesize is sticking their neck out with some of their marketing because a security expert lady that I met a number of years ago, she's a fantastic woman, knows her crap, says it's not a question of if, it's when you're going to get hacked. It's not a question of if, or it's when you're going to get broken into. And I think Lifesize has forgotten that adage when it comes to security, and they're in for a rude awakening, and that they'll get hacked eventually, and then they'll have egg on their face because of their current marketing.
I listened to a webinar with Eric Wan talking about Zoom and some of the security features that they're putting in. I can't even remember what the term is called, but it's literally that they are paying hackers to.
There's a bounty. Yeah, there's a bounty program.
Bounty program. Yeah, that's it. That is fantastic. You don't hear Microsoft Teams doing anything like that. Maybe they do. I've never heard of Microsoft Teams doing anything to that nature. It's as always, if people start using it in their thousands, people are going to try and manipulate it.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing: it will expose weaknesses that you never would have gotten in the smaller numbers, right? There's a reason that you have small rollouts, and there's a reason that Netflix only allows, certain movies until they get the bandwidth and they get the infrastructure in place. This put a strain on Zoom's infrastructure, and it showed some cracks.
And you know what? That they like this. We've had meetings and we've had our AV hangouts, but with a couple of points. We've had hundreds of people in our room, and it didn't go over. And that's the way I look at it. What I really want to know is, when all this COVID-19 ends, will people still keep their accounts? Will they still want to use Zoom? Is this the new social media end of things compared to Facebook, Twitter, to be able to talk to people? I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of people will keep the basic accounts.
I think they will, and something that Chris Netto has started a month ago when we all started getting locked down. I think that'll continue, and that's these virtual happy hours. Because one thing that Chris would tell you this, he is, even in his college days, what he did really well is he got people together to have a party, right? He's an old DJ, and that was part of his job, was getting people together. And the ability to have a drink with you and with Ifat and with JP and with Kevin in addition to having one with Joe Way and Mark Coxon and Meg on the other side of the country from me. Mm-hmm. I think there is something intrinsically valuable with that. Now, is it something that you can put a money amount on? No, it's nothing that's going to make anybody money, but it's something that connects us even more so than Twitter or social media ever will, because I can see you, right? And we can respond, and we can have that nonverbal communication and raise a glass to each other and really, really connect on a personal level, far more beyond than just ISE or Infocom or any other trade show.
The All Things TechIE podcast is a product of the Extreme Media Network. For advertising and sponsorship opportunities, please visit www.extrememedia.ie. That's XTREME media.ie.